Hi, you're listening to Episode 3 of the Women in Depth podcast. Welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Lourdes Viato. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is about cultivating a conversation around the uncomfortable, uncertain, and unknown aspects of a woman's experience. Through interviews and stories, we'll go beneath the surface to take a deeper look at relationships, motherhood, self-acceptance, authenticity, aging, healing, suffering, loss, and other areas connected to the emotional and psychological well-being of women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Today our guest is Mari Lee. Mari is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified sex addiction therapist, and the founder of Growth Counseling Services in Glendora, California, where they provide sex and pornography addiction recovery treatment for individuals and couples, as well as counseling support for betrayed spouses and partners. Mari is the co-author of a best-selling book on Amazon called Facing Heartbreak, Steps to Recovery for Partners of Sex Addicts, and is a popular national speaker on the topics of women's issues, trauma, and resiliency. Mari also provides consulting services for clinicians who need information in supporting their work in the area of sex addiction or partner's trauma. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Mari because I feel that sex addiction is a topic that's misunderstood, not really talked about, yet impacts so many lives. According to the website for the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, nearly 12 million people suffer from sexual addiction in the United States alone. And if you think about those 12 million people having partners or spouses, children, families, the number 12 million is really so much larger when you think about the impact of sexual addiction. Additionally, because sexual material is so easily accessible, online, TV, videos, those numbers are actually increasing. So in this conversation with Mari, we'll take a deeper look at sexual addiction, what it is, what it isn't, and what are some of the ways that those impacted by sexual addiction can begin to heal and recover. So today, Mari, I really wanted to just ask you questions and be informed and inspired by you regarding aspects of sex addiction. And so I'm just going to start off with, a pretty basic question of, what is sex addiction?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so sex addiction is a complex topic, right? It's kind of a hot topic in our culture and our media. As you know, it's been my clinical specialization for more than a decade, back in the day when it wasn't such a hot topic, before the Tiger Woods scandal and some of, these other things that we see that are kind of commonplace in the media these days. But essentially, when we talk about sex addiction, what we're talking about is an individual who is struggling in their relationship with their sexuality. And I'm not talking about their sexuality in terms of coming to terms with orientation or fetish behaviors. As a sex addiction therapist, I'm not ever there to pathologize how individuals do sex, right?
Right.
Sex is as unique as a person's thumbprint, a sexual blueprint, and what turns a person on or what fires a person up sexually is really unique to that individual. And so sex addiction therapy is not sex negative therapy. Sex addiction therapy is designed to support an individual who is feeling out of control in their life with their sexuality. So if you think about it like other addictions, Lourdes, for example, drug addiction or food addiction or a gambling addiction or alcoholism, it's a way of soothing pain. So some individuals soothe unresolved trauma and emotional pain by drinking their emotions, right? Alcoholism. Some
Right.
people by shooting drugs. Some people by overspending or gambling. Some people by stuffing their feelings with food. There's all kinds of ways that human beings soothe, and sometimes people soothe with unhealthy sexual behaviors that are compulsive. And so when we talk about sex addiction, there's criteria that we're looking at. There's a lot of criteria, in fact, a lot of research, a lot of criteria, a lot of assessments that go on, and even determining if that person is a candidate for sex addiction therapy. Again, it's not looking at a person's sexuality and saying, oh, that's different from my sexuality, so therefore it must be unhealthy. That's not it at all. It's taking a look at somebody coming in pain and saying, for example, I'm married, I have children, and I have spent my retirement money unbeknownst to my wife and taken out a second mortgage on her home because I am completely addicted to acting out with male transvestites, for example. And I am on prostitution websites, and I have or a mistress that I am supporting, or I have contracted an STI that I'm worried that I have passed on to my significant other or partner, or I'm acting out with anonymous sex partners that I meet on Craigslist, and I'm not telling my partner that I'm doing this, and he or she believes that we are in a monogamous relationship. Or I am a person I work with a lot of people in the entertainment industry, and these individuals then, Lourdes, are sometimes terrified that they're going to be outed by the paparazzi or have been outed by the paparazzi, or they're a physician who is getting ready to lose their medical license, or the story goes on and on. And so we're looking at particular criteria that's very specific. They've tried to stop in the past, right? They've had unsuccessful attempts at stopping. There's secrecy and isolation, right? It's a compulsive behavior. They don't feel like they can stop, and so forth.
What really stood out to me, Mari, as you were speaking, was just the theme and the energy of the loss of control.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the nutshell, there is such a loss of control, and there's so much shame and fear, and sometimes rage, sometimes what's called eroticized rage is at the root of this, and helplessness, that this individual really does feel like they are out of control in their life and they don't know where to turn. And I find that especially so with women, right? Women who are dealing with an unhealthy relationship with sex or compulsive in their sexuality, because there are so many negative labels applied to women, right? Men sometimes are called playboys or revered for having sexual prowess if they have many, many partners, where we know that there's slut shaming that goes on with women who have many partners or are out of control in their sexuality. So thankfully, more women are coming forward and seeking out sex addiction treatment to help them understand, really at the crux, we're talking about an intimacy disorder, Lourdes, where people who deal with sex addiction and sexual compulsivity, and listen, I'm not married to any particular title. I don't care if it's sex addiction or sexual compulsivity. It doesn't really matter to me. But if they're having an unhealthy relationship with sex that's resulting in really negative consequences in their life, this individual is usually unaware that they are confusing intensity with intimacy, and that is based in trauma.
And so with sex addiction, if you were to trace back and see where did this begin, or how did this come to be, the roots are in trauma.
Yes. Trauma and attachment, most specifically. Now, let's set that aside for just a moment and take a look at comorbid, right, features as well.
Okay.
It's really important too so if a person comes in and they contact me and they say, I want to set up a first session, I think I might have an addiction to pornography, or I might be a sex addict because I can't stop going to the strip club and I'm pouring, I'm spending through my savings and so forth. My wife is going to leave, my partner's out the door, whatever that is, right?
Right.
All that criteria that we just discussed. So when they come in, I'm also looking at other a dual diagnosis. I'm taking a look at things like anxiety disorders. Does this person deal with OCD, for example? And this is how they're looping in their obsessive compulsive disorder, right? I'm looking at things like bipolar disorder. I'm looking at personality disorders, histrionic or borderline. I really want to suss out if there's something else that is organic going on with this person, the biopsychosocial assessment. And so if I move through those assessments, and there's usually something else that's going on, some kind of addiction interaction, some sort of trauma response, something is happening there. I see a lot of anxiety in the practice as well. But if that's being acted out in sexual compulsivity, there are other assessments then that are given to the client. One is called the SDI 4.0, and Sexual Dependency Inventory, and a Trauma Inventory that I help the client move through these assessments so that I'm really determining almost an X-ray into that human being's sexuality. Again, not to pathologize them, but to see what's happening here. What is really going on, and to unpack some of that pain so that I can move forward in that treatment plan with that individual. And also, Lourdes, too, on the flip side of that, many people have come in before. I had a couple, I don't know, sometime last year who came in, and I won't go into obviously all of their details, but just in general, let's say a couple comes in and they say something like, I don't know if we're sex addicts, we love to swing with other couples. In other words, have sex with other couples and trade partners. We really love to go into S&M clubs. We like to tie each other up and sort of the chips, dips, chains, and whips lifestyle, right?
Right.
And so it doesn't matter to me if a couple comes in and they say, we like to dress up like Hello Kitty and Snoopy and, spank each other with red ropes. Listen, that's not my thing, but if that's their thing, great. And so what I say is, are you both consenting adults? Everybody in this and everybody having fun, nobody feeling pressure, nobody feeling pain or pain that they don't want, or feeling that they are being hijacked into this particular sexual lifestyle. Okay, wonderful. No children involved. Wonderful. No non-consenting beings like animals involved. As long as you are not harming anyone outside of your sexuality, have fun. If you want to swing from the chandeliers, tie each other up, experiment, wonderful. It sounds like you have a vibrant sex life that works for you. Again, what I often say, and forgive me if this sounds crass to your listeners if it does, but I am not the penis or the pussy police here, right? I am here to support healthy sexuality. And if a person is dealing with compulsivity, then I'm there to support them in moving forward in a healthier relationship with their sexuality.
I love how you described just really discerning what is healthy sexuality and what is more on the continuum of sexual addiction. And earlier, when you described that this is not the same as sexual orientation or a fetish, this is really about out of control, compulsive, sexual acting out, and the confusion of intensity for intimacy. I love how you also mentioned intimacy disorder.
It is an intimacy disorder when we really think about that, right? Because when we think about, when we think about sex addiction, sexual orientation has nothing to do with that. How we experience our gender, how we experience our sex, how we enjoy sex, that's great. That's a whole other separate thing. And so sex addiction therapists are not here to pathologize clients' sexuality or how they experience themselves or their orientation, gender, any of that. I have clients in my practice who come and see me because they've felt, in other words, that they were sexually compulsive, but really, in fact, what was going on is that they were feeling a lot of shame and a lot of pressure and not coming out. They were feeling a lot of shame and pressure in their gender and not feeling like they could be who they want to be, not dressing how they wanted to dress, and not experiencing themselves how they want to experience themselves in the world. And it gives my heart a lot of joy to see people move into embracing how they experience themselves as sexual beings. So again, my role as a sex addiction therapist is not to pathologize or be sex negative. It's to know that human being and help them move into a healthy relationship with sex, as long as it's, again, not hurting or harming anyone else.
Yeah. And I can see the importance of really doing a thorough assessment to discern and to really get clarity on what's happening with this individual. I was thinking about a situation with, I've seen this in several clients where they may be acting out and it may appear as if it's a sexual compulsion, but it's a reaction of coping with trauma. Mm-hmm. You know, and when you get to the trauma and you begin to do that healing work, or it could be related, like you said, to anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so it's just showing up in their sexual acting out, but not necessarily a sexual addiction.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And again, it's really semantics. You know, really, Lourdes, we use words to make sense of things. That's what we human beings do, right? So for me, sexual addiction can be replaced with hypersexuality. It could be replaced with sexual compulsivity. I think the good thing is that more and more therapists like yourself are really understanding that sexually compulsive behaviors are rooted in trauma and are able to help clients do that. And then if those the compulsivity continues, they understand that, okay, this person needs a more focused and higher level of care with an expert. So if I need glasses, I'm going to go to an ophthalmologist, right? And get glasses for my eyes and all of that. But if there's something going on in the eye itself, then I'm going to go, an optometrist, then I'm going to go to an eye surgeon, somebody who specializes in that. So it's just knowing when to refer out these clients to those specialists. But it's a wonderful point that you bring up, that, yeah, we have to look at the trauma. We have to look at the roots to the fruit being the acting out behavior. Yeah.
Mari, I wanted to also speak with you about how sexual addiction or sexual compulsivity, again, the languaging can be very different with this. When it's happening and the person is in a long-term relationship or a marriage, how does this impact the partner? Mm. You know, what are the effects on a person who finds out or is struggling with their loved one's sexual addiction?
Yeah. So it's a traumatic wounding to the partner. And I really want to underscore that again. Discovering or having your mate disclose to you that they have been sexually compulsive outside of the relationship is a trauma wound to the partner. It's a traumatic wounding. So the women that I work with, and of course I'm a recovering partner of a recovering sex addict myself, right? So I know that wound firsthand. I experienced that. And interestingly enough, I first came into that knowledge when I was looking for a thesis topic in grad school. What was I going to write my thesis on? You know, I'd had some ideas, and then all of this came out in my own relationship. And so that's what I devoted my thesis research on, was on the psychological impact of being a partner of a sex addict, right? Which then, of course, became the foundation for facing heartbreak. So it's interesting how all of this weaves together, right? Our stories. Yeah. But some of the emotions that the partner share across the board are betrayal, of course, anger, shock, and these emotions manifest physical symptoms, so sleeplessness, migraines, body aches, intestinal issues, back pain, a compromised immune system, so they're more susceptible to colds and flus. Mothers share that they have a very difficult time being emotionally present for their children. Students share that they are failing out of classes because the internal resources that would be available to passing those classes is now completely devoted to a place of hypervigilance toward the addict and his or her behavior. People are not, they're impacted in their professions. They're not able to focus on jobs, or they have to take a leave of absence. They're being written up at work. That's not unusual at all. Tears, crying, sadness, shock, shame. That's another big emotion that partners share, feeling like, great, now I have to hold the secret because I don't want my family to judge my husband or wife or my partner. And so I have to be the secret keeper and bear the symptoms of that secret. Or I feel ashamed to share. Let's say it's a person who is of a particular faith and they're in a faith community. I'm ashamed. I don't want the word to get out because my husband or my wife is a person of notable position within that community. There's so many emotions that the partner goes through, and they cycle in those emotions. They have really no one to turn to.
That's the one thing that I would say is a theme that I see with partners of sex addicts is the isolation that they're experiencing because they can't go to anyone. They can't tell their best friend. They can't go to their spiritual community or their faith community. They don't want to tell their parents. And there's this internal struggle that I see with wanting to protect and their partner and to keep this secret, but at the same time a resentment of having to do that at the same time.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right on with that. That's exactly what I see as well. And what's so sad, right, Lourdes, is sometimes when these women are brave enough, and it's usually the woman who's initiating, now and then it'll be, I'm just using a heterosexual couple for the purposes of our conversation, but it could be, the couple could be gay, could be straight, whatever. But let's say it's a hetero couple with, we'll just say that the female is a partner and the male is a sex addict, right? I find that typically it's a woman who's reaching out for support for couples therapy or kind of the spouse mandated, you better go to therapy or I'm leaving you type of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's how the sex addict will find himself in session with me. But I think what's so challenging is that these women sometimes when they're initiating that first call and sometimes the very first time they've ever even been in therapy, if the therapist, and this is not a slam on therapists, right? But if that therapist doesn't understand the roots of sexual addiction and understand partners' trauma, many partners have shared with me that they feel then further traumatized in the therapy experience because they're being asked to participate. They're being sort of labeled as prudes or sometimes even labeled with a personality disorder like borderline personality disorder because the therapist, to their credit, they don't understand, but they're not understanding that the traumatic symptoms, the literal PTSD symptoms are showing up as rage, right, are showing up as quote-unquote snooping or stalking behaviors, where these behaviors are actually safety-seeking behaviors.
I love how you describe them in that way. Because, yes, I have heard therapists refer to some of these behaviors that they see in the partner of the sex addict as possibly borderline personality disorder type actions, but not really seeing that this is part of the the wounding,
That's
the
right.
traumatic wounding that's going on.
That's right. Listen, there's always going to be trauma, right? Human beings, nobody's exempt, right?
Right.
We call them the big T and the little t traumas, right, Lourdes? So for
Right.
listeners who might be hearing that, who are not therapists for the first time, okay, what is a big T trauma? Well, a big T trauma would be something that the tragedy that just happened in Orlando, Florida, right? That is a
Right.
big T trauma. Or the Stanford rape is a big T trauma. A little t trauma might be a parent neglecting a child and being on the cell phone all the time, or that child, not being validated in the home. And so those little t traumas add up and become a bigger T trauma. No human being is exempt. You cannot get from cradle to grave, right, without experiencing some sort of traumatic injury in your life. I wish that weren't true, but it is. And we're
Right.
not looking to pathologize people as therapists, right? I work from a strengths position. I work from holding a hope position. So I don't want to make everything into a traumatic wounding. That's not what I'm about as a therapist, and I know that's not what you're about either. But it's taking a look at when we're talking about partners and their pain. Of course, there is trauma that pre-exists the relationship and pre-exists the sex addiction discovery or disclosure. We know that, right? But we also want to think about what's called sex addiction induced trauma. That's the trauma that's been introduced to the partner within the relationship. And yes, that trauma can certainly activate old unresolved trauma that pre-existed the relationship, but that's like telling the partner, that's like a partner coming in or a person coming in to an emergency room and they're bleeding out, right? They've had a traumatic injury and they're bleeding out. And we're saying, we need to take a medical history. Did you have chicken pox when you were 5 years old? No. We need to assume that that person probably has had illnesses before. But right now we have to attend to that and triage that partner and validate her pain and help her with that sex addiction-induced trauma, help her get grounded, help her develop some tools and some strengths, help her put her eyes and her focus back on herself, create boundaries, and give her a toolbox from which to draw. And then we move back and help her with some of the other unresolved trauma that's being activated. But we have to help her first validate that is a trauma that she's coming in with. So when that's not validated and when she's not feeling heard, it absolutely can show up as borderline features. And again, for listeners, I don't want to assume that listeners are going to understand what that means. Borderline personality disorder is it's a disorder of trauma. It's somebody who has a wound of abandonment and they act out oftentimes that wound, that traumatic wounding through rage. So this might be the partner that is throwing something or screaming at her sex addict mate, or is cursing or throwing ultimatums out there, or quote unquote snooping through, phone records and so forth. And if the therapist, again, doesn't understand partner's trauma or sex addiction at all, it's going to look very much like bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder because they're not understanding that that's how the trauma is showing up. And they don't have tools to teach the partner to regulate. And so in those cases, it is really important, instead of pathologizing the partner, to refer that partner to a specialist.
So, Mari, when a couple comes in, and let's go with the example of a hetero couple, the husband is the addict and the wife is the other partner. What does recovery involve for both of them? What does that healing process look like?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you, Lourdes. You know what? And all the times that I've been trying to think, I rarely am asked this question in an interview, so I really appreciate that. So when we think about a couple, right, we have to think about these two separate nervous systems, right? These two separate human beings, right? They could be very close, or maybe they are not close as a couple, but these are two separate individuals, and they come into their relationship, again, with pre-existing trauma or pain points, or attachment wounds, not knowing how to attach in a relationship. And we know that attachment is developed in the family of origin. It's how we learn to be in relationship with other people. So without going into a big, lesson on attachment disorders or attachment wounds, essentially these individuals come in with their own ways of attaching or not attaching, their own ways of doing intimacy. I have a wonderful colleague, Stan Tacton, and he calls it the island and the waves, right? So ambivalent attachment or, reactive attachment. There's all kinds of ways of attaching. And so when the couple comes in and they're in the throes, let's say she's just discovered that he is acting out with other partners or prostitutes or whatever it is, and it's really disrupted the relationship. She's scared. She's confused. She's betrayed. She's angry. He feels shame. He feels fear. All of it. You have this deregulated couple, these two human beings sitting in front of you. The very first thing that I let the couple know is, listen, there's a lot going on here. I do some psychoeducation around what sex addiction is, what it isn't, what partner's trauma is, what it's not, and let them both know that first, before we can heal the coupleship, we've got to have both of the individuals in their own work, working on their own process. And so for the first few sessions, he will be then referred to a sex addiction therapist, or I'll work with him. And then she'll be referred to a partner's therapist, or I might work with her. Obviously, I would not be working with both of them at the same time, nor should any therapist be doing that, by the way. And then there's all sorts of recovery tasks and performables that each one of them will be doing. So within that first year of therapy. And that would take a whole other interview to go through, and really a year of certification process to teach what those are. But suffice to say, there are a number of performables and tasks and things that the addict is going to be learning on his side and discovering, and same thing for the partner. They'll both also be in group work, so she'll be in a community of support. Typically, partners are resistant to that in the beginning. Not always, but sometimes, because of what we discussed earlier, Lourdes, around the isolation and the shame. Yeah. And as much as the partner is resistant, the addict is 10 times more resistant to his own therapy group, because that feels really scary, because we know that addictions flourish in secrecy and isolation. Yes. So coming into a system is really scary for the addict, but it is absolutely non-negotiable. Certainly at my center, addicts must have a community of support through a sex addiction group, period. I don't work with individuals if they're not willing to do group work. So we get them stabilized in their own individual therapy. So that would be weekly, in their weekly therapy groups. And then about 3 months in or so, when we're getting close to a process called formal disclosure, that's when the addict is disclosing all of the acting out behavior, which you can imagine is anxiety-provoking for the addict and also a traumatic wound for the partner. Both of these individuals have to be prepared for that. And then when we get to that piece, then it's important to bring in the couples therapist to help them begin to stabilize in the couple. And sometimes I'll bring the couples therapist on board right away. It really depends on the couple. Sometimes not, until we get closer to the formal disclosure process. So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to healing that wound of sex addiction for couples. But it starts with individual therapy.
And Mari, when with couples who are able to move through this and heal, what do couples who heal and move through this, what are they doing differently than maybe couples who don't make it?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say that it's been very rare in my experience in doing this work for couples not to make it when they're both all in and committed to the recovery. But there are times when couples don't make it. And the couples who don't make it are the couples who, for example, the addict who has very clear stated goals. I will not act out sexually outside of the relationship. I will not act out with prostitutes. I will not act out with pornography. Whatever the sobriety contract is that he, she, we, they have put together for themselves, he is willing to work towards his stated goals, right? Not perfectly, but with progress and consistency over time until that's the new normal. However, for couples who don't make it, these unfortunately are individuals who continue to act out against their stated goals. They continue to lie. They continue to deceive. They continue to have to break their sobriety and not disclose that. And so the partner is constantly re-wounded and re-traumatized in that cycle. She thinks that they're in a place, it's almost like, I think about it like this. You know, they're building a boat together, which is their recovery, right? And then they're getting into that boat together and they're really excited, right? And they have a map. There are their tools and they've got their oars, other tools that they've learned. And then there's their island that they're going to right there. That's Recovery Island over there. And they launch their boat and she is rowing and rowing and rowing as hard as she can toward that island, but she's not getting anywhere. And she's thinking, what is going on? And she turns around and she sees that he is rowing as fast as he can back to the sex addiction shore.
Right? Wow, that's a great metaphor. I love that visual.
Right? And when she says, what are you doing? He says, I'm not doing that. What you're seeing isn't real. I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, oh, well, okay, maybe it was a mirage. Maybe, okay, maybe not. All right, well, let's both row to that island. Okay, let's do it. And she looks back and he's rowing, but pretty soon they're not going anywhere. And the boat is taking on water and she turns around and he's drilling a hole in the back of the boat. And when she says, oh my God, what are you doing? He says, I'm not doing that. I don't know what you're talking about. So that's called gaslighting. Yeah. That's what that means, gaslighting. It's denying her reality. And for addicts who are not willing and they're not all in the recovery process and they continue with that staggered disclosure or no, I promise it was just one slip. I really haven't been looking at porn, but then she finds more porn. Yeah, it was only the 3 times, but I promise that was it. And then it's 10. That's called staggered disclosure, which is completely traumatizing for the partner, and or gaslighting present where her reality is being denied. These are couples that won't make it. Now, that's on the addictive side. Many addicts come in and they're in. They may not be all in the beginning, but as they see the benefit in working through their unresolved trauma, as they see the benefit of really knowing themselves beyond this label of sexual compulsivity, but knowing where the pain points are and healing those so that they can be the best human being that they are designed to be, right? Sometimes what happens is their significant other, their wife in this case, using this hetero couple as an example, they refuse to go in and get therapy. The attitude of the wife is, it's not my problem. I didn't ask for that. Fix him. I don't have any work to do on my side. And I get it. You know, I get how a partner can feel that way for sure. I felt that way in the beginning. I didn't ask for this bullshit. You know, why am I having to put up with this stuff? I'm a busy woman. I'm working, going to grad school. I mean, good grief. You know, why do I have to deal with all of this? But in the end, there were things that I was complicit in the relationship, Lourdes. I did have some controlling behaviors. I don't work from a codependency model, or I definitely don't work from a co-addict model. I wish that word would just be eradicated in the sex addiction community. But I work from a trauma model in helping partners. That said, every human being in a relationship with an addict, there are codependent features available, present in that person. And I certainly had codependent features where I overcompensated and did too much of the heavy lifting emotionally in the relationship. And so I had to look at some of those behaviors. My behaviors did not cause his sex addiction. No partner is responsible for the addict's behavior, because that addict at any point could have said to that partner, I think we need couples therapy, or this is what I'm doing and I need therapy, or I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. So a partner is never responsible ever for the addict's acting out, but she is responsible for taking a look at behaviors that did not contribute to the coupleship flourishing, right?
Right, right. Now, Mari, if there are some listeners out there, maybe it's someone who's just discovered that their significant other may be a sex addict, or there's someone listening who is wondering or feels that this is something that they are struggling with themselves, what would you say to them?
First, I'll speak to the addict, and I would say if you are a human being, right, struggling with sexual compulsivity right now, I want you to know that I think that you are a really courageous person to be listening to this conversation. And although I am not a person who has struggled with sexual compulsivity, I want you to know, even as a woman who has a partner who is a recovering sex addict, I have compassion for you as a woman, as a human being, and of course as a sex addiction therapist. That when you work with somebody who is a CSAT, a certified sex addiction therapist, or a therapist who deeply understands sexual compulsivity like Lourdes, you're not going to be judged. No one is going to judge you, and no one should judge you. And if you have ever had that experience with a therapist where you have felt judged, I am sorry that happened. That is not okay. If you've ever been wounded in therapy or by a therapist, I'm so sorry that experience happened. And you deserve to be a whole person who doesn't live a sexual secret life. You deserve to be a person who has a healthy relationship with yourself first, and with your significant other, and with your sexuality. And I would encourage you right now, somehow you're listening to this conversation, so pick up the phone, go online, a wonderful website. I can only work with clients within the state of California because that's where I'm licensed. So you could be listening from any place in the world right now. But please do go online. There's a wonderful website called sexhelp.com, www.sexhelp.com. And you can do a search by country, by zip code, by state to find out who those therapists are that deal with sex addiction and that can support you. You're also, is it okay, Lourdes, if I give my website?
Definitely.
Okay,
I wanted you to also share, the best way to get in touch with you and any of your favorite resources.
Okay, great. I'll do that toward the end then. I'll share that. But yes, please do reach out. Trust. And if you, for whatever reason, you can't afford therapy, then there are free resources out there. And I'll give those in a few minutes here as we wrap up, Lourdes. And then to the partner, what I would say is if you're a partner listening to this healing conversation, my heart goes out to you. My woman's heart goes out to you first as a woman. If you're a male partner, my woman's heart goes out to you. I know firsthand what that feels like, that sense of betrayal and confusion and shame. And I want you to know that there is support and there's help, and that it's not your fault. You've done nothing wrong. It's not because you're not attractive. It's not because of anything that you're doing that your partner is acting out sexually in the relationship. They are soothing pain that is unresolved, and likely they are not a bad person. They are a good person making bad choices, choices that are steeped in trauma. And it's okay for you to find your voice firmly, right? Not aggressively, but assertively. There's a difference there. And to let that person know that you love. I will not continue in this relationship if you are not willing to seek help for yourself. And if you're not willing to do that, then I will have to assert boundaries and you will have to experience consequences for your behavior because I do not feel safe. It's okay for you to have safety requests. And listen, I know that it's very difficult to know how to, what I call my little Mari rule is we have to know, we have to name, and we have to maintain our boundaries. And so this is where I'll share then, Lourdes, about my website and materials, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So for listeners that may not know me from Adam, that's okay. No worries there. I have no ego in that. There's lots of wonderful therapists in the world doing good work to support addicts and partners dealing with sexual deception and compulsivity. I happen to be a co-author of a book that's considered to be one of, if not the best book for partners in the world right now. And that book is called Facing Heartbreak, Steps to Recovery for Partners of Sex Addicts. And again, that's Facing Heartbreak, Steps to Recovery for Partners of Sex Addicts. And they can find that on Amazon.com. And again, my name is Mari, M-A-R-I, and my last name is Lee. And then for addicts, there's a wonderful companion workbook written by a colleague, Dr. Patrick Carnes, C-A-R-N-E-S, and that's called Facing the Shadows, Steps to Recovery for Sex Addicts, Facing the Shadows. And both of those are excellent books that will give you lots of great tools. And then I'll give my clinical website, and certainly you're welcome to reach out to me if you'd like. I only work with clients located in the state of California. But I do have a lot of resources available that are free on that website. So the address of my website is www. It's a long one, so bear with me. growthcounselingservices.com. That's growth, Growth, counselingservices.com. And then you'll just go to the resource area and you can look at all kinds of different books that I recommend, resources that are available, websites, 12-step programs, all kinds of good stuff, all sorts of free goodies. And also I have a First Steps for partners and addicts on that website, in my website store. This is a paid product and it's an ebook, and that it will take you through wherever you live in the world. It's a packet of information that provides first steps for partners, very reasonably priced at $69.95 for partners, and then one for addicts. The partners is called Beyond Betrayal, First Steps for Healing of Partners of Sex Addicts. And then the sex addict packet is called Strength and Honor, First Steps of Recovery for Sex Addicts. So those are also resources that are available. But I think you know my style, Lourdes. I'm certainly not here to sell anything. I'm here to be of service and support. So there is zero pressure to get any of the products that I have written. Rather, just know that there's lots of free resources on my website. And if you think that those packets would be of support, they are there and they're available for you.
Mari, thank you so much. This conversation has been absolutely incredible. Just the wealth of information that you have shared from your heart and all of the places and resources that someone can begin this healing journey. I'm just so appreciative of your time, spent here today having this conversation with me.
Oh, Lourdes, it has been my pleasure. Thank you. I really soak those kind words, and it really just is my absolute pleasure. Like I said, this is the highlight of my week. I'm passionate about this topic. I feel like this is more than a job in my life. This is a calling in my life. For whatever reason, being a partner of a sex addict in recovery was part of my journey as a woman in the world. And I feel grateful. I really am so grateful and honored to be able to support other women and men struggling through their own betrayal pain, and also for the trust that addicts give to me. My addicts call me the Velvet Brick, which is so funny, right? That nickname. They say, Mari's really compassionate, but boy, she's no nonsense. She takes us seriously. So I am passionate about this field, and I'm here to support, healing work in the world. That's what my role is. That's what I'm called to do. And it's been nothing short of a pleasure. I absolutely love your style. I love your program. Lourdes, you're providing such a great platform. These in-depth conversations. Wow. We need more of these. And I am deeply grateful as a colleague and a healer in the world that you have taken that on, to do that. Good for you, because it really is a work of love that you're doing here. So it's been nothing short of a pleasure. And for anybody that just heard my doorbell in the background, this is real life, so I apologize. We try and create these quiet spaces, but yes, the doorbell rang. So what are you going to do?
Thank you so much, Mari.
You're so welcome, Lourdes. Take good care.
Right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, what an amazing conversation. There was so much to take away. What stands out for me is how Mari describes sex addiction as an attempt by the individual to soothe emotional pain, and that the individual confuses intensity for intimacy, and so sexual addiction is also an intimacy disorder. I also liked how Mari clearly differentiated that sex addiction is not related to, it's not connected to, and it's not the same as a person's sexual orientation, a sexual fetish that a person may have, or any sexual activities that consenting adults choose to engage in. Another thing that stood out was how Mari described that the discovery of a partner's sexual addiction is experienced as a traumatic wounding, that this is a trauma wound to the partner and must be approached in that way, and therapy must support the person in that way in order for the injured spouse or the injured partner to move forward and to heal. So I hope that this conversation with Mari was informative and interesting for you. I know it was for me. For show notes to today's episode and to find links to the resources that Mari mentioned, along with the link to her website, please visit www.lourdesviado.com/Women in Depth podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.